Hello, the purpose of this screencast is to go over the 4 causes of the Great Depression. You can pause at any time during this screencast, so I am going to move at a nice even pace. So the reading purpose is Causes of the Great Depression. That should be the title of the notes page. And our first reason is the stock market crash. I'm going to show you a short video before we get into the notes. Hopefully the sound is okay.
Lured by fast riches, many Americans went wild in the 1920s, investing beyond their means, often with money they didn't have.
People seriously believed in the 1920s that the stock market and everything else could continue to go up and up and up forever.
And they weren't the only ones. Even banks speculated using depositor funds.
Many banks had been speculating in the stock market, that is, betting the share prices would go up. And when stock prices crashed in the autumn of 1929, hundreds of banks lost a lot of money. Their depositors learned about the bank losses, and they naturally feared for their own deposits.
Their lack of confidence quickly turned into panic. By 1931, people flocked to the banks to take their money out.
In normal circumstances, this is fine, because as many people as want their money out are balanced by those people who put their money in. But in times of panic, when people begin to think that the banks are not sound, they all want their money out at once, and the banks simply don't have the money to give it out. That's what's called a bank run, and it often leads to the collapse of the bank.
In 1931 alone, more than 2,000 banks closed. By 1933, 4,000 banks closed. The financial crisis left thousands destitute, many hopeless and hungry, often in despair.
People who have saved up their whole lives preparing for retirement might discover on the eve of retirement that they have no money left at all. The bank failures wiped out tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of individuals.
In 1933, newly elected President Roosevelt took steps to renew confidence in America's banking system. He declared a bank holiday so the federal government could assess the banks and determine which were worth saving through federal assistance. Roosevelt also initiated legislation for depositors' insurance, and in 1933, the Federal Insurance Deposit Corporation, or FDIC, was created.
What this meant was that depositors knew that if their banks failed, they would still...
Okay. So we got the gist of why the stock market may have crashed in the video, talking about people making bank runs. In other words, people were betting that the stock prices would go up, up, and up. And so they put money into the stock market, betting that it's always going to get better and better. But then when the stock market changes direction, people start to lose faith in it. And banks were investing this money too. And as a result, they didn't have much money because all their money was tied up in the stock market. So when people came to get their money out of the banks, it wasn't there. So consumerism is our first note. During the 1920s, people became consumers, meaning they purchased pretty much everything they needed for daily life, did little production of their own, didn't grow their own crops, didn't make their own clothing. Cycle of consumerism is people have money. With that money, they buy things. Factories respond. They create things that people can buy. As a result, this creates jobs in factories to meet the demands of greater numbers of products. And this cycle goes on and on. So again, people have money. They buy things with that money. Factories need to keep up with the demand, so they create things for people to buy. This creates jobs in the factories to meet that demand. Stock market crash continued. So we're still under Roman numeral 1. Stocks were artificially high. So a company's stock or the value of its product is priced higher than what it is worth. And this is because banks and individual investors thought the stock market was going to keep going up and up. In other words, it was just going to keep getting better, so why not put more money in it, because then you'll make more money. This is due to the belief or speculation that the company's product is in high demand. So people said, well, I'm going to put money into XYZ product because lots of other people want it. It's in demand. And therefore, if I put $1 in, I might get $5 out. But the bubble bursts when the price is regarded as too high and it returns to its actual worth. So in other words, once it's realized that people aren't buying that product at the rate they thought it was, this is when the bubble bursts, and then the price of the stock returns to what it's actually worth. Banks were putting customers' money into the market. So banks are playing the same game as individuals. They are putting their money into the market too and tying all their money up into the stock market because they think it's going to keep going up and making them money. When the bubble burst, there was a bank run, which is an important term right here. And go to banks and demand their money. So people are flocking to banks to get their money because they see the stock market turning, and they run to the banks to get their money at least out so they have their money in their hands and in their on their person. But banks did not have the money because their money was also tied up in the stock market. This leads to banks failing. So, result, banks fail. They simply don't have the money to pay back the people that put their money into it. And therefore they fail, almost like a business would fail if it doesn't make enough money. Second reason, bank failures. So, how banks make money? Well, banks invest in stocks, just like individual people do. Banks loan money and collect interest. So banks invest in stocks, hoping the stock market will go up, and then so $1 goes in, they hope to make a profit on that. So they invest in companies they think are going to do well. Banks loan money and collect interest. So they will loan money to an individual, let's say to buy a home, and then they collect interest on that loan. So they make a little bit more than what the person put in each time that person makes a payment. They need to pay this interest. After the bubble bursts, the banks lose investments. So they lose all their money that's going into the stock market because it turns out that those companies are not doing as well as they thought. The banks do not have people's savings to pay them back when the bank run occurs, and this causes failures. Bank failures continued. Cycle of depression. So much like we had the cycle of consumerism, now we have cycle of depression. People do not have money. Therefore, people do not buy products. Therefore, factories start to lose money. To save money, factories lay people off. This results in people being out of work. End result, people can't pay back loans to the bank. So like we said here, where banks make money off of loans that they've collected and the interest, well, now that people don't have any money, they can't pay back those loans. So the bank is not getting any money from those people that owe the bank money. And this cycle goes on, and it leads to bank failures. Cause number 3, manufacturing producers fail. So people are purchasing goods. Companies take out loans to meet high demands. So companies go to banks too and say, can I borrow money and I'll pay it back with interest to meet the high demands of the consumer, knowing that more than likely the consumers will give them enough money and they'll be able to pay those loans off. But factories create a product surplus to meet the demands they think will continue to go up. So in other words, even though they don't have that much demand for a product, they think it's always going up, so they overproduce and create a surplus of goods that then they want to sell. thinking that that demand's gonna be there. Number 4, price goes down to sell off surplus. So when the surplus doesn't sell, that's when they have what's called a sale. And they lower the price of the good to get rid of the surplus to at least make some money. Companies begin to not make enough money. And now companies need loans to survive. So now they're not taking out loans to produce more goods to make a surplus. Now they're taking out loans just to survive and keep the company afloat, meaning pay their workers, run the factory, pay the bills. But eventually the companies cannot pay back the loans either, just like individuals can't pay back the loans. Number 4, agricultural producers fail. So this Dust Bowl, we're going to watch a short video on that.
(1934). Darkness falls across America. Dust storms hit New York, Chicago, and Boston. Ships stop off the eastern seaboard, not sure what is happening. Dust storms were born out of a 100 million acre dead zone, 2,000 miles away in Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, and Colorado. The Great Plains had once been the most fertile grasslands on Earth. The topsoil was 6 feet deep, but it has been plowed up and used up by 4 generations of farmers. Now, the sun has dried it up.
What really did the farmers in was an environmental cataclysm that involved an extended drought, high winds, and the loss of millions and millions of tons of topsoil.
By 1930, the rains virtually stop. Then a freakish phenomenon happens. Static electricity builds between the earth and the dust. Like a magnet, the static electricity sucks up more and more dust, feeding itself, growing in size and power. A monster is created. The dust is lifted up to 10,000 feet. Powered by high-altitude winds, the monster rips across the country looking for prey. The cold front drives the storm south across the prairies at 65 miles per hour. It grows more and more powerful, produces enough static electricity to power New York City. People tie themselves to ropes before going to a barn just a few hundred feet away. Cattle die, and when they are cut open, their stomachs are full of sand. By 1936, farmers are losing $25 million a day.
Farming is no longer a possibility. The Great Depression takes hold. Their mortgage comes due. They can't pay it. They're not growing crops. They lose the family farm. They lose their identity.
A century before, 500,000 people had gone west on these same trails looking for hope. Now, 250,000 of them are fleeing the Dust Bowl in despair.
So agricultural producers fail. You just saw the video on the Dust Bowl and how that actually occurs from years of basically overplanting and then lack of rain. So there's very little rain. Land was overused for 4 generations. So that topsoil doesn't have any nutrients anymore. It's just basically sand. High winds blow off dry topsoil. So this destroys the soil, period. And crops fail to grow. And as a result, people who have any job connected to agriculture, whether they actually grow crops themselves or produce tools to grow crops, or let's say are a business in a small town where mostly farmers purchase goods from their store, all those people go under because they are either out of work or they are in hard financial times because of the Dust Bowl and the failure of agriculture during the Great Depression. Homework. Pull out the need to knows for the notes on changes during the Roaring Twenties. That has been posted, and a screenshot of the actual notes is posted as well. Also, pull out the need to knows for the notes you just took on causes of the Great Depression, and this is due tomorrow.